Hey everyone, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to another card making video. Now today I wanted to talk all about cardstock. It's one of the biggest questions that I get. What kind of white cardstock I use in all my videos. I don't always share the name of it. I don't always share what type of surface that I'm using. So in today's video, I wanted to dive in deeper on what my favorite kind of cardstock is and what it's great at so you can decide if it's the right cardstock for you and your crafting needs. So I'm going to start off the video with a cardstock comparison, and then we're going to jump into lots of different techniques you could do with the cardstock, and lastly we'll put together some Valentine's Day cards using all the examples that we created. Everything I use will be listed in links down below so you can check it out, and using those links helps support me, so I really appreciate it. Now without further ado, let's get into it. Now I wanted to first start off by talking about my favorite cardstock, and that is Simon Hurley Stark White Cardstock. This comes in a pack of 10, it's a 110-pound cardstock, and it comes in 8.5 by 11 sheets. Now before you click away, because it's my own cardstock and this might seem just like an advertisement, just know that I launched this cardstock because I thought that it was necessary. It was different than anything else that I was using, and I don't believe in just launching a product just to launch it. It does everything really well, and that's stamping, blending, watercoloring, and even foiling and other techniques. And it's just a great all-around thick white cardstock that's perfect for card making. Lots of people have tried it kind of just thinking, oh, you know, this is gonna be a white cardstock. Maybe it's not that different than anything else. And lots of people's minds were immediately changed and they switched over to just using this, which I know happened to me when I first tested it out and wanted to launch it. I tested over 50 white cardstocks before I launched this one, and I absolutely love this. It reacts way different than any other cardstock I've seen. So this 10 pack is how the cardstock is always available, but also on the Ranger Ink website, if you shop exclusively there, there is a 50 pack of Stark White Cardstock, more of a bulk pack. So if you decide you really love the cardstock and want lots more sheets, this might be the way to go for you. And today we are launching 3 new packs of Stark White Cardstock in different cuts and fold options, so it's really easy as a card maker to buy these and get right to using them in your craft room. These are all 3 exclusively sold on the Ranger website, and we did that just to make sure we can get the pricing perfect for you guys and not upcharge it by selling it to other people first. So you're getting the best price that we could possibly give on the Ranger site with these. So starting off, we have the 20 pack of Stark White Cardstock card panels. So this is 110-pound cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And you get 20 sheets in here. I always recommend to have these card panels cut perfectly for you before you start crafting. I find that personally it creates less waste in my craft room, because let's say I cut down a card panel from my cardstock, but then I want another littler piece and then you're left with just 2 big scraps that you might never use. I love cutting them down to card panels first so I can just grab the card panels and start easily creating with them and not have a bunch of waste as I'm creating. So this is perfect for that. I already have a bunch of these ordered so I can put them in my craft room and have them right next to me as I create. And then we have the card bases. So this is a 10 pack of side folding card bases. These are 5.5 by 8.5, and when folded down, it'll make a 4 1/4 by 5.5 A2 size card. And they're already pre-scored for you, so it makes it really easy to fold them and get right into creating a card on your card bases. And then there's also the top folding card bases. This comes in a 10 pack and it's 4 1/4 by 11 inches, but then once folded down, it'll be 4 1/4 by 5.5, so again, an A2 size card, perfect for creating with. So these are the 3 new packs. So as you see me kind of pulling these out through the video, I'll show you just how easy they are to use, but I love them for convenience factor. They already are pre-cut and scored for you and ready to go, so you're ready to just get right into creating, and nothing is going to take you out of that creative state. All right, so let's jump right into the cardstock comparison so I can show you why I love Stark White Cardstock over other cardstocks on the market. Now I have 2 other cardstock examples. One is kind of a big name cardstock, and then the other one is the cardstock that I was using before Stark White Cardstock that I absolutely loved for crafting, but didn't really know what I was missing out on. Now starting off, let's compare thicknesses. This one is an 80-pound cardstock, so it's a little bit thinner. This cardstock number 2 is 110 pounds, so it's nice and thick. And then my Stark White Cardstock, again, is 110 pound, so it's nice and thick. These are going to be great for card bases. I would say cardstock 1 or an 80-pound cardstock is great for kind of a layering weight if you want to, but I always just prefer using 110 pound even for layering, because I tend to do lots of inky techniques and want the cardstock to hold up to that. Now let's also compare the cardstock white colors, because not all whites are made equally here. Now this cardstock number 2 seems a little bit more yellow than both of them, just a little bit too warm in my opinion of a white, whereas as the Stark White cardstock and cardstock number 1 are very similar in the white that they have. I would say Stark White is just a little bit warmer of a white, and cardstock 1 is more of kind of a cool toned, almost like bluish gray white. So not too big of a difference there, it's just your opinion. I tend to prefer a warmer white. That's why I chose this Stark White color. It's a really nice bright white, but if you want more of a cool toned white, you can always know there's options like that in the market too. This is where things get really important. We're gonna start applying ink to it, and I'll show you just the difference between all of these cardstocks. So let's start off by going in and applying some ink. So I'm using my Simon Hurley Create ink in the color Prom Queen here, and a domed foam blender, and we're just going to start our blending. So I'm gonna start off of the cardstock and start blending in from the corner here. We'll create a nice kind of soft blend of color. I think it looks great. It's a little bit splotchy here and there, but you can always even that out by continuing to blend. Now here's where things get a little bit different. All right, that first layer laid down really nicely. I'm gonna go in with another layer of ink. You can see it's kind of taking it. Now it's getting a little bit shiny on that surface there, and it's kind of stopping taking the ink. If I can continue to go in a little bit more, it's now just going to kind of continue that same color over and over, and it's not getting a ton darker. All right, so we'll leave cardstock number 1. Now let's go into cardstock number 2. I'm gonna go in and do that same blending technique from the corner of the cardstock and start kind of fading it out onto the surface here. Now again, this is doing a pretty decent job of blending. It's applying our color down onto the surface there. Now let's say we wanted to go in and layer up even more color. I'm gonna go back in with my domed foam blending tool and start blending. And now at a certain point, again, it's going to just stop accepting more of that color, and it's just going to kind of start sitting on the top of the surface. Now here's where we get to a problem here. You can see just how much ink is on top of that surface. If I swipe this at all that ink comes on my finger because it's not sinking directly into the cardstock. Same thing kind of here with this one. When it becomes shiny like that, you kind of know that the cardstock has a coating on it. Now it's very smooth. You can sort of almost feel it on cardstock number 1. On cardstock number 2, you can't even tell that there's a coating until you start blending with the inks and until it sort of stops taking more color and just becomes kind of a flat color like this. Now let's go into the Stark White cardstock because I want to show you the difference between the blending here. So I'm going to go in and start blending on the surface here. It's going to be nice and smooth. Now I always say that it's a little bit of your ink, but it's also your cardstock that's going to help you get that nice smooth blend. You can see this blended out beautifully, just like the other ones did. But then we'll go in with more ink. Now this is where things change because you're allowed to get as light of a color as you want with the cardstocks, but when it comes to adding as dark of a color as you want, that's where I love Stark White cardstock. There is no coating on this cardstock surface. So after 2 layers, it looks just like the other ones, but then if you want to, you can keep going in and blending more and more to keep layering it on top of the surface, and it's not going to stop you. It's going to allow you to keep applying more and more color, and it's going to take all of that color and make it really nice, dark, rich color. Now you can stop whenever you want to, but let me just show you this. It's absolutely beautiful. And now let's swipe it. None of that is coming off on my finger there. It really dries into the cardstock super nicely. You can see this is the finger with that first cardstock. Here is the Stark White cardstock. Barely any comes off on your finger at all because it really sinks in nicely. You get a nice matte finish because there's no coating on top of here. So that ink is sinking directly into the cardstock. Now let's compare this, okay? Let's compare it to cardstock number 1. You can tell the drastic difference between how much ink this takes. Cardstock number 1, after a while, will just stop accepting the ink and you get a flat color. But let's say you wanted to add more depth and dimension with some shading. That's where Stark White cardstock really comes in handy and allows you to keep blending as much ink on to the surface, and it'll take all of that ink because there's no coating. Cardstock number 2 takes more of the ink than cardstock number 1 does, but look, there's like some weird speckles in the cardstock. It's just how the cardstock is kind of made. I don't know what that necessarily is. It looks like a little bit of pulp or kind of grain in the cardstock. And then check that out too. You can see kind of the varying levels of how much of a coating there is on the surfaces with how much ink it's going to allow you to apply. But that is why I love Stark White cardstock so much. It's because you don't necessarily have to worry about fingerprints all over because it dries very quickly into that cardstock. It's very absorbent, but also it's going to allow you to keep adding as much color as you want on it to make it as dark as possible. You can even go in and probably add more to the surface here And you can see it's just getting darker and darker of that super rich hot pink color. I think it's amazing. Now for this next test, I want to go in with just a water sprayer, and I'm just going to lightly spray on some water onto the surface of all of these cardstocks just to see how it's going to react with water. Now each cardstock is going to react differently. My Simon Hurley ink reacts with water very nicely, so I just want to see how each one of these is going to do with the water. Now I'm not going to lift the water off the surface. Instead, I'm going to go in with a heat tool and just heat dry this, which sometimes will intensify those water markings, and I just want to see how it lifts up the color. On cardstock number 1, you can just see how muted that color is. I'm telling you, it doesn't really allow you to add as much ink down onto the surface there. Now, when you add that water down to the surface, it still kind of takes some off that surface and goes to a much lighter color there. I like that. Now, it is warping quite a bit because it's that thinner cardstock, but if this was 110 pound, maybe it wouldn't warp as much. Now, cardstock number 2 removed some of that color, but not nearly as much as cardstock number 1 did. It kind of left a pretty mid-tone pink color where all of that ink was. And then on Stark White Cardstock, it did a really good job. I think it kind of bleached it out more than cardstock number 2 did. Pretty even to how cardstock number 1 did it, but because it's much darker, you can really see there's a lot more of a difference there. That's one of my favorite things with Stark White Cardstock, is you're still able to do all of those different water techniques on it, and it will work no matter how much ink you added to that surface, which I really appreciate. So that really is the main difference between Stark White Cardstock and other cardstocks on the market. Just test what you have at home and see if you're able to kind of add more and more ink to get to as dark as you want, or if it kind of stops at some point and just lets you kind of lay that color on and maybe gets up on your fingers because there's a coating on the surface. A lot of people don't know that a lot of cardstocks have coatings on them. Some you can feel more than the others, like this one you can really feel is super smooth and coated, but this one just feels like a regular cardstock, and you wouldn't know that it has that coating on until you applied ink to the surface, and it really becomes apparent. Now clearly it's less of a coating than cardstock number 1, but I wanted to show you the varying spectrum of what a coating on a cardstock could look like, and then what a completely uncoated cardstock looks like, and how that really takes ink and water really beautifully. Now that we got the comparison kind of out of the way, let's jump into doing a bunch of techniques using the Stark White Cardstock so you can even get a better feel for it when we're creating cards. Alright, so let's jump into one of my first favorite techniques, which is a blending technique. I want to show you how beautifully these colors blend together on the Stark White Cardstock. Even though it absorbs so much of that ink, you'll see it still blends beautifully on the surface. So with this, I'm going to use a rainbow assortment of colors. I'm going to do Prom Queen, Shooting Star, and Clear Skies. Now in between this pink and the yellow is going to create an orange, and in between this yellow and blue, it's going to create a nice green color. Now you can always switch out Prom Queen for, let's say, a darker red if you want to. This is kind of a pinkish red called Love Struck. That will work as well for the same result. I just tend to like Prom Queen. And then you can always switch out like Clear Skies for a truer blue, like No Diving if you want to too. But a red, yellow, and blue is what you're looking for if you want a full rainbow of colors and you don't have a ton of inks on hand. This is a great kind of cheat to get a rainbow assortment of colors. And to do my blending and have the paper stay in place, I'm just going to stick down my Altenew sticky mat to start out with, and then I'll place down my Stark White Cardstock and we can start our blending. Now I happen to really love this larger sticky mat because I can also place down my ink pad on the side and it's not going to move as I do my blending, which is really nice. So I'll lift up some of the ink using my domed foam blending tool, and then I'm going to go right onto the surface of the cardstock and start my blending, right on the middle of the surface, and it still didn't create a harsh mark. One thing that I love about this cardstock is it's very forgiving. Even though it takes the ink beautifully, it also lets you kind of move the ink around a little bit and smooth out those harsh marks for some reason. I don't know why it does that, because it does sink in right away, so you would think that it's not able to move or shift, but it blends absolutely beautifully and gives you a super smooth and soft effect as you're coloring things in. So I'll just blend out that pink. You can see how beautiful and intense that color is. If I want to go darker, I totally can, but I'm going to leave it there for now. Then next I'm going to go in with Shooting Star and do the blending with this. Now you saw how dark I went on that first example. You don't always have to go that dark. You can always start off much later. I just wanted to really show you like just how dark you can get with the colors, because that's really important to me as I'm blending, and you'll see why in just a little bit later. Now if you want to kind of create those colors in between, this is where you'll kind of overlap the next color. So here I'm going in with Shooting Star and I'm really overlapping it on top of that pink, and it's going to create a beautiful orange color in between, which I really like. And then last but not least, I'll go in using a bit of Clear Skies and my last domed foam blending tool. If you want it to not be so harsh, you can always tap off a little bit of that ink off to the side before you go onto the surface here. This ink pad is really juicy, and then I'm just going to go in on the surface and do my blending. I actually just re-inked the Clear Skies ink pad, so it's a lot juicier than the other ones, as you can tell, but I'm going to overlap it with that yellow, and then you can always go back in if you want to and kind of re-blend it in using the other blending tools, and it'll help smooth that out. But you can see it smooths it out beautifully. Even if there was any harsh marks with that blue, smooths out nicely on this cardstock surface. Now let me show you another lifting technique. Here to do this one, I'm going to go in using the Polka Dot Assortment layering stencil. This has 4 different stencils inside of the set. It has a large polka dot, medium, a little bit smaller, and then really small little polka dots in the set. So you can layer these up as a layering stencil, or you can take different polka dots from the set and use them to just create different designs together by shifting it. Now whenever I'm using a Simon Hurley stencil, there's a glossy side and a more matte side. I'm going to stick that glossy side facing down towards any sticky mat that I'm using. The matte side of the stencil has more of a coating onto it, so you don't want to stick that coating down into anything sticky, otherwise it might peel off of your stencil. Then I'm going to go in with a little bit of water, and I'm just going to lightly mist a couple sprays of water over top of our stencil here. And you'll see it sinks right into that cardstock, which is really nice. Like I said, the Stark White Cardstock is super absorbent. So when I peel this off, you're not going to see like puddles of color onto the surface. It just kind of starts reacting immediately and starts lifting up some of that color. But you're not seeing all that water just puddling all over the place, which is something that I really like about Stark White Cardstock. If you want the color to stop moving and just kind of intensify those spots where you added the water, you'll go in with the heat tool and just heat set it, or you can let this air dry if you want to. Either way is totally fine. It's not gonna have any effect in how it dries. So I'm just gonna do a heat tool because I'm a little bit impatient. And you can see that removed the color beautifully in those polka dot designed areas. I added a little bit too much water in some areas and it went way underneath the stencil. But one thing that I love about that Stark White, like I said, is that it absorbs right into the cardstock, so you're not getting water pooling everywhere, even though we added tons of water down onto the surface to lift up that design. And again, it lifts up the color beautifully too. It really brings it down to kind of a bleached effect and lightens all of those colors, even though we added quite a bit of color onto the surface of the cardstock. Then to clean this mat off, I'm just going to spray it down with a little bit of water, and my Simon Hurley inks clean off with just a little bit of water, which is really nice. And then this mat will be nice and sticky once all the water evaporates from it and you're ready to move on to the next step. All right, then I'll lay back down this background for the next layer, because for the next layer, I want to add a little bit more color. To do this, I'm using stencil number 3 from this set. They have little etched numbers on them. This is the second smallest polka dot in the set. I'm going to take that glossy side again, flip it over, and then all I'm going to do is line these polka dots up in between the polka dots that we just bleached out with water on the last step. So just lining them up on the surface, and then I'll place it right down into the sticky mat. Then let's do our blending. We can go back in with the exact same ink pads, and now this is where having your cardstock that allows you to take as much ink as you want is really important. We're gonna go back in and blend just a little bit more of each one of those colors over top of the background, and just going in with a little bit of a heavier hand. Now on the other cardstocks that I showed you earlier, it wouldn't allow you to do this because, like I said, at a certain point in those cardstocks, that coating on top of the surface doesn't allow you to add any more ink onto the surface. So you're not able to kind of keep darkening your background, mainly because it won't take any more ink. Whereas on this Stark White cardstock, it allows you to put as much ink down as you want onto the surface. Now there's probably some limit. At some point it will stop accepting it, but I have found that you can really add lots of layers down before that point happens and really get a much darker effect than you originally started with. So it might seem like nothing's changed just by adding a little bit more of the same exact colors of inks down, but when you lift off the stencil, you can see that it's much darker now in between, and we've created a really cool pattern. So you have the same colors of ink down for the whole background, then we bleached it off with one of the polka dots, which is a really great lifting technique that the cardstock allows you to do, and then we added even more color down to the already dark background that we blended out just by adding more ink down, and the cardstock takes it beautifully. And like I showed you earlier, not all cardstock is created equally. This is cardstock number 2 we were blending on, but check out all of like, not the watermarks, but those little tiny speckles on the surface of that blending, whereas this is pretty smooth across the whole surface. So it's just differences in how the cardstock is made. But it really makes a difference in how a nice smooth blended background turns out in the end. Alright, to turn this background into a card, I want to use a die to cut it out. Lately, I've been really loving some more basic dies to cut things out instead of just cutting it out in a rectangle. It makes it a lot more interesting. Some of the sets I've been loving are from Spellbinders. I really like this nested posted labels and tag, which I think I'm going to use for this background. But I also wanted to run through like some of their essential hearts. These are some of my favorites. They're modern ovals because they're a little bit different than an oval and you got more space inside of them. And then you have more postage edge ovals and some circles. So these are some of my favorites that I've been going back to. And I just wanted to share those for you in case you want to kind of spice things up rather than just using rectangles, which I tend to do all the time, but I want to make things a little bit more interesting lately. I think I'm going to use this postage label for right here. I think that's like the perfect size. And then if you want to, they also have little stitched edges too that cut out and then have a little stitching on the inside as kind of a bonus inside of here, which is nice too. So I'll line this up where I want on the background, and then I'll take a little bit of mint tape to hold it in place while we run it through our die cutting machine. And then we'll pop this right out and check that out. That's what I really love about it. It makes like the perfect edge. So this postage edge has a little bit more detail, but I like just like an oval or a circle too. I think just adding that little shape kind of finishes off a background nicely. All right, going into the top folding card base Stark White card packs. This has a score right in the middle of the card, so it's really easy to do. All you need to do is pull it out here. Now there's a little raised side and one that's more inset. You might be tempted to fold the inset one inwards, but I like to fold it so that the raised score line goes inside of the card. I just find it's easier to fold down that way. I know it seems counterintuitive, and then you could just crease it down with your hand and you've got a beautifully folded card base. Really super easy to do. That crease mark makes it perfectly simple. And if you want to get that fold even more crisp, you can go in with a bone folder and just score down that line to make it really nice and crisp. All right, then I'll adhere this right down onto the surface of the card with an even border all the way around. And I love that that bright postage edge really stands out nicely from the Stark White card base. Now we've been talking a lot about the coating on the surface of cardstocks and how Stark White cardstock doesn't have that, which is really helpful when it comes to stamping as well. Because sometimes I struggle with stamping on other cardstocks because it sits too much on the top of the surface. It doesn't give you a rich enough color because it doesn't sink into the surface, and it sort of has that glossy effect that waits too long to dry. So that's why I love stamping with Stark White cardstock, and I'll show you that using this Butterfly Kisses layering stamp set. And I'm going to stamp both of these butterflies in here. So we'll stamp this large one and this medium-sized butterfly. And then this is where the pre-cut Stark White cardstock really comes in handy. I've got the drawer next to me that just has a bunch of pre-cut card panels in it and card bases. So I'm just able to pull out some Stark White cardstock and start working with it right away. For this first layer, I'm going to use some VersaFine Clair Nocturne to get a nice crisp jet black image on the outlines of these stamps and stamp it down. And it allows for a really great crisp stamped outline. Now most cardstocks will allow you to do outline stamping really well like that, so this is nothing new, but I just wanted to stamp these down first before we go in and do the inside coloring pieces. So we'll stamp this little butterfly down as well. Perfect. All right, now I'm gonna do this next layering part in my Misty stamping tool just to make sure that I get everything really accurately stamped, and if I wanna do it a second time, I totally can. So I'll just place this down. I have my waffle flower sticky mat right inside of my Misty stamping tool to make it easy. And then I'll go in with these solid pieces that will color the butterflies in. I love when stamp sets include these because it makes coloring really easy. All right, then I'll look over top of the stamp to help line it up to color it in. All right, and then once that's ready, I'll pick this up with the lid of the Misty stamping tool. All right, for this first large butterfly, I'm going to use a little bit of Shooting Star ink to ink it all up. And you could do this in one pass if you want to, or you could layer on the colors in several different layers. I'll start off just by doing it in one pass here. Then I'll take a little bit of Prom Queen and I'm just going to kind of roll this color onto the edges of those butterfly wings, just by using the edge of that ink pad to blend the colors together. I think that looks great, and then I'll do the same thing on the other side. So let's go back in then and stamp this right down onto that butterfly image. That looks great. And let me show you guys up close. When you tilt it in the light, there's no shine there. That ink sunk into the cardstock right away, which is really awesome and gave a nice crisp stamped image. And if you want to, you can also add other colors in as well. So like I'll go in with some Roar here if I want to add a little bit of orange in. I love doing this on a blending brush for kind of a softer effect. So if you want to do this instead of just using the full ink pad, you totally can. And I'll add a little bit of orange to the center. So there's pink on the outside, yellow in the middle, and then there will be a little orange right in the center to help blend it together. Now for this top one, let's do a little bit of clear skies on this first layer. Like I said, this ink pad is really juicy. And then we'll go in and stamp it down. And even with that really juicy ink pad, check it out, it still sinks in right away. No shine to it. It looks really great. And then again, we'll do this method of adding a little bit of shading to it. I'm gonna go in using Crown Me and just add that right to the center of that butterfly and kind of blend it out softly, and we'll stamp it right down. Then I'll lay down the little bodies of these butterflies and pick them up with the stamping tool. And for this, I'll just use a little bit of dark gray shady ink to color those in. I like doing shady because it's not totally black, but it'll really color these in nicely. See, I think that looks really great. All right, now to cut these guys out, there is coordinating dies. I keep the coordinating dies in the back of the stamp pocket. This is a stamp storage pocket from Altenew, and I really like it. It's got these kind of like stitched, really thick edges on them, so it seems like they're gonna really hold up even with quite a bit of stuff in them, which I really like. And I'll pull out the two coordinating butterfly dies that go along with this set. So go in and line them up with an even white border, and then use a little bit of mint tape to hold it down. All right, then I'll go in with my Platinum Scout. This is my Simon Hurley Black Scout Edition. I absolutely love this because I can keep this on my desk and cut out all of the little images like this really super easily. So if I have coordinating dies or word dies in a set, like this makes it really easy to run it through and do it super quickly. And then I just keep it right on my desk with me to cut things out. And then check it out. It still has all the same power as a regular die cutting machine because it has metal rollers inside of there. It is small but mighty, and it cuts really beautifully. All right, and then I'll go in and pop these right up on a little bit of foam tape. And I'm just putting it right on the center so that the wings can kind of flap upwards to add a little bit more dimension. All right, perfect. And for a little bit more sparkle, I'm gonna add some Astro Paste, starting off with the color Slippery and Wet. And I'm just going to take a little bit of this kind of golden yellow color. A really tiny little bit goes a long way, and I'm just going to lightly tap it onto the wings of this warm colored butterfly. And I'll do the same thing on the other wing. Again, tiny little bit, goes a very, very long way, and just lightly tap that on. That applies it really thin so you can still see all that color, and then when you tilt it in the light, that's where you're gonna see that sparkle and shine, and it dries in a matter of seconds when it's this thin. And then for this one down here, I'm gonna go in with a little bit of purple, so this is that Crown Me color, and again, I'll just take a really tiny little bit of that color and start applying it down. And this Crown Me color has a little reflex of blue and some purple in there, and it just creates such a beautiful look when you tap it on to that butterfly. How cool and sparkly is that? Now for a sentiment, I'm gonna go into the Everyday Sentiment set that I created with Spellbinders. This has a really great myriad of different basic sentiments like happy birthday, thanks, thank you, thinking of you, love you, hugs, hello. There's so many great basics in here. I wanted to pull out the love you sentiment for a Valentine's Day card, and I'm not going to use the shadow dies. You can use those if you want the sentiment to really stand out more against your card, but I don't think in today's case that I need to use those. All right, so I'm bringing in my Scout machine again and my Simon Hurley Stark White Cardstock. I love to do die cuts out of the Stark White Cardstock because again, it's nice and bright white, but also it's nice and thick. So especially if I want to layer a die cut or have it be more substantial, even with just one of them, it makes it really easy to do that nice and quickly with the Stark White Cardstock. And also if you want to make die cutting go by faster and you just have a small little die on it like this, I just run it through and then hold it down to make sure nothing shifts and then just reverse it back through, and it makes cutting these out a little bit faster. So I'll pop out these sentiments, even with all of that little detail, these cut out beautifully. And I'll do this about 3 times. And something that you might not think of too is if a die isn't cutting perfectly, I actually recently found this out. If you use a thinner cardstock, you might think that that would work better, but sometimes it actually doesn't work as well because the thicker cardstock provides a little bit more pressure, and therefore it just cuts out a little bit easier. So the more you know, that's why I love this really thick Stark White Cardstock in here. The other day I did a thinner white cardstock with some sentiments and it just didn't work as well. All right, and to make layering these up really easy, I'm just gonna go in with a little bit of liquid glue and put it on the back of the die cuts. Then you just place it on top of one of the other words, and then I just kind of lightly pinch these together to line them up a little bit easier. And since we're using liquid glue, you have just a couple seconds to move it around and pinch it together, and then it's all nice and aligned perfectly. And this is why I love that thick Stark White Cardstock. Check out just how thick that is with 3 die cuts on top of each other. It just makes it a little bit more substantial, and it'll pop off your card without having to use any foam tape because it's nice and thick already. All right, then lastly, I'm going to adhere the sentiment down using a little bit of liquid glue, and that looks great. All right, here's a closer look at that finished card. I really love how it turned out with that blended background, again by bleaching the color out and then adding even more color on top to create that fun polka dot tone-on-tone look, and then showing you just how easy it is to stamp clear, crisp images with those butterflies and get tons of color, and then adding a little bit of glitter to finish it off. I can't wait to send this fun and beautiful card off. All right, next let's move into another fun watercolor technique that I want to show you that Stark White Cardstock is really good at. So I'm just bringing in a pre-cut piece of my Stark White card panel, and then I'm going to go in using the Happy Hearts stencil. This has two different stencils inside of it. They're layering stencils, so that when you layer them together, you get a pattern that looks like this. Now I'm going to use the stencil that has the smaller hearts on it, and I'm going to use the glossy side of the stencil for this technique. I'm not sure if it really matters, but I find the glossy side works well for me. I'm going to set my cardstock off to the side for just a second as I do my inking on here. All right, so I picked out a couple kind of Valentine's Day colors that I think are gonna work well for this heart. So starting off with Bee Sting, I'm just going to take this ink pad and kind of smoosh it down onto the glossy side of the stencil. My ink pads are very juicy, so this is gonna be colored beautifully, nice and dark. Then I'm going to go in with a little bit of Prom Queen, and I'm going to kind of smoosh this right next to that Bee Sting color. Now you don't want to overlap them too much. If you do just a little bit, that's totally fine. You're just going to want to go in with a little paper towel and kind of wipe that off until it returns to the original color. Now I wouldn't do it with like a yellow into a black or a super dark color. Try to use your lightest colors first, and then it won't get contaminated at all. All right, then last but not least, I'm going to go in with a little bit of Crown Me and do this last area at the bottom of the stencil. Kind of smoosh it down with my inks there, and that looks great. It should look something like this, nice and covered with that color of ink. Then I'm gonna go in with a little bit of water and start misting this down. And you wanna add quite a bit of water so that the inks are kind of moving on the surface. This is what you wanna see. You wanna see them kind of moving and blending. Now, if you add less water, you're gonna get less kind of moving and less of a watercolor look. If you add more water, of course, you're going to get more movement and blending. And I'm just going to take this stencil and flip it right over onto the surface of my Simon Hurley Stark White Cardstock. When I'm doing this, I'm going to take my paper towel and lay it down, and that's going to seep up any of the excess ink that's coming through those hearts. But you can see that this seeps right into my cardstock very quickly. There's still only kind of a puddle here, and you can see it's fast absorbing into my cardstock. That's what I love about Stark White Cardstock when it comes to a technique like this. Because when I lift this off the surface, you're not getting huge puddles of color. Most of it has already seeped in because, like I said, the Stark White Cardstock is very absorbent when it comes to inks and different watercoloring techniques, which I prefer. It's good for some techniques and not others, so do keep that in mind. Like if you're wanting to really blend your watercolor before it seeps in, this might not be the cardstock for that, but it does take water nicely and doesn't really like warp too much or really crinkle or get ruined. I think this background looks great. It looks like a beautiful watercolor design, and I love these kind of fun and playful hearts all throughout the background. All right, for this next layer of the stencil, I'm going to lay down a piece of mint tape behind my surface to hold it down while we do our stenciling. Then I'm gonna go in with the second layer of the Happy Heart stencil, which has these larger hearts, and line it up in the same area on the card. All right, then for this background in particular, I'm gonna go in using the Frostbite Astro Paste to put a clear layer of glitter right through the stencil. So it's not gonna be super noticeable or stand out, but it's gonna look beautiful when you tilt it in the light. So I'm gonna start off by just taking some of the Frostbite paste and just applying it to the top of our stencil here. I always like to start off with more than I need at first, so just applying quite a bit at the top. And then I'm gonna grab my scraper tool that comes in the same set as the palette knife in my paste tool set, and I'm just going to gently scrape this all the way down the surface. Now, if there's any excess on your tools, you can always take this and put it right back into the jar. So that's why I said don't worry about adding a little bit too much down at first and just put that right back in. And then we can lift this off the surface of the cardstock, and it did a great job with that paste. Now, there's quite a bit of paste on there with that design, and you can see it's not really warping more than it did with that watercolor. It stayed pretty darn flat. That's because it's a super thick cardstock, and like I said, it takes the moisture really nicely. It just kind of seeps it into the cardstock. Pastes tend to be a little bit wet since there's a lot of liquid inside of that medium, so you need a cardstock that's going to hold up well to that and not warp a ton. I know some cardstocks get like super wavy. I've tested it out with some of my pastes, and you don't want that. But like here, for example, I used one of my stencils along with some of the neon lunar pastes, which are really beautiful, and you can see like there's very, very minimal warping for the amount of paste that's on the surface. It's quite thick, and the stencil design has a lot of design in it, and it took that paste really beautifully and held up nicely to it. So I wanted to show that it's great for lots lots of different mediums. All right, and I set that paste off to dry for about 20 minutes on the side, and check that out. It looks so beautiful and sparkly. It kind of takes on the color that's underneath it and becomes transparent, but it really shines in the light super nicely and catches your eye. But I love that it doesn't just jump out at you right away or take over the background too much. It's really pretty. All right, then for this one, let's go in with one of the side folding card bases from the pack. Again, I'm going to fold with that ridge facing towards me and just fold that right over. Super easy to do. And then again, go in with a Teflon bone folder and just score that down to make the crease a little bit sharper. All right, then I'm going to adhere that background right down onto the surface of my card. All right, to make a focal point for this card, I'm gonna use the nested postage labels and dies again, mainly because I want this one to look like a postcard or like a Polaroid kind of vibe in the center of my card. And you'll see why in just a second. So for this, I'm gonna take a scrap of my Hurley Stark White Cardstock, and then I'll run this right through my little Scout machine. Super quick and easy. And that cuts that out perfectly. I love that. And then I'm going to use the Mythical Monsters stamp set. I love this one for Halloween, but also Valentine's Day, because there's kind of fun sentiments like I'm wild about you, I think you're cool, I only have eyes for you, that like are perfect for Valentine's Day, or you look beautiful. Like all of these are really great. And I think this monster is gonna be so fun, and I think I'm gonna do I'm wild about you with him. I love his little smile there. He looks so awkward. Then I'm gonna go in with VersaFine Clear Nocturne ink, and I'm going to ink him right up and stamp it right down onto the postage die to really make him stand out on the front of the card. This is a great idea for little Valentines too. Like if you want to just make this section and tie it to like little candies to pass out for a classroom, like I think that would be so fun. And some of the sentiments in here aren't super like love themed, like I think you're cool or things like that would be really great for the Valentines. And this ink stamps great, but it takes a little bit longer to dry. And so I like to just set it into place with a little bit of clear heat embossing powder. So I'll throw that over the top and tap off any of the excess. And then I'll heat set this until it's nice and clear and shiny. All right, that looks perfect. And this makes it really nice and easy to watercolor staying inside the lines too. So it seals the ink in, but it also makes it easier to color. Now let's talk about just regular watercolor with inks. I'm gonna take my Hurley ink pads and I'm just going to smoosh them down onto the surface of my craft sheet to create a nice palette of color. Here I'm using Prom Queen and a little bit of Crown Me. Now whenever I do my watercoloring, I like to just make a little palette of water off to the side. That way I don't have a big cup of water that I'm gonna knock over accidentally. And then what I like to do is go in with a little bit of water to start out with. Now this is because the Stark White Cardstock is super absorbent, but I recommend doing this with really any cardstock that you're using for watercoloring. This is especially going to get the Stark White Cardstock ready to take the color, because you saw earlier with other techniques that the color just wants to sink right into the surface. So if you want more time to blend, wet the cardstock before you add any color down. Then I'm able to go in with the ink colors and I can go right in and start blending this out. And you'll notice the color kind of sits on top of the surface a little bit more and kind of wicks out and allows you a little bit more time to blend than you would usually have with Stark White Cardstock. And then I'll dip right into the Crown Me and start at the bottom and start blending that into the pink color. Now you still don't have tons of time to color and blend and play with colors for like lots of time. I would really switch to a watercolor cardstock if you're doing heavy watercoloring on here. But if you're just doing kind of a light wash of color, I have found that the Stark White Cardstock works really well for me and does a really great job. All right, and then I'll go in and add a little bit of kind of darker colors using the same colors and just kind of adding a little bit of shading here and there across the image and then blending it all together with a little bit more water. And you know what, I actually dried it just a little bit because I want to go back in with color and just add like little polka dots of color here and there. So I'm gonna add little dots of the purple kind of all around to create kind of little designs on the monster here. Kind of give him a little bit of texture. And once this is dry, here is how that looks. And I gotta be honest with you guys, we did a lot of watercoloring on here. Like we added quite a bit of water and you can see the surface is still completely smooth. It didn't really warp too much here. And also it didn't pill. There's no like fuzziness going on with the cardstock here, even with the water that we added. So the Stark White Cardstock, it does take quite a bit of water. It does blend as long as you add a little bit of water down on the surface first. And it creates a really great effect with watercoloring. Like I said, if you're super serious into watercoloring, this might not be the cardstock for you, but I really chose it because it does a great job at everything, like stamping, blending, and watercoloring. Those are the things that I do most often. So as long as it does each one of those pretty well, it's a great all-around cardstock for me. And then I'll pop up the little monster postage background right onto the front and center of the card. All right, that looks great. All right, and here's a closer look at that finished card. I love how it turned out with that fun watercolor background using the stencil. It's such a great technique and creates such a beautiful watercolor look. And then of course using the other layered stencil with Astro Paste to really bring it to life and give some great shine in the background. And then of course that little monster makes me smile big time in the center from that Mythical Monsters stamp set. And watercoloring in with Simon Hurley Create inks is really fun to do. All right, now lastly, let's talk about foiling. A lot of people say that you need to foil on a coated cardstock surface. And let me be honest, I hate coated cardstocks. We've talked about this all throughout today's video, mainly because you can't do a lot of different inking techniques on it. So if I do my hot foiling on a coated surface, that means that I can no longer do any ink techniques afterwards. And many companies sell coated surfaces for hot foiling, saying that it's better, but I just don't believe in that theory. And in fact, I've tried many of these coated surfaces and they're just not my favorite for hot foiling. I have found that Stark White Cardstock works really well for hot foiling, and let me show you why. So I'm gonna go in just like I regularly do with my hot foil. I'm going to use a little bit of gold hot foil from Spellbinders, and I'm going to use my must-have sentiments glimmer hot foil set. This has all of the hot foil sentiments and then a separate die, but all the sentiments are on one plate, which makes it really easy to foil and cut out in one pass, which I really love. So I'm just going to cut out enough foil for these sentiments, and I just use a little cutting mat and a rotary trimmer to go around the sentiments really easily and cut them out. And then here's how I do my little sandwich. I do a piece of my Stark White Cardstock, then I place down the hot foil, and you want the pretty side of the foil facing upwards, so that golden side needs to be facing upwards. Then I'm going to take my hot foil plate and I'm going to place it with the pretty design side facing down towards the pretty side of the foil. So the pretty side of the foil plate is going to face the pretty side of the foil. Then I'm going to take a little bit of mint tape to hold it in place because you don't want anything to shift, and I'm just going to tape it down to my cardstock. All right, then I'm going to take my Glimmer hot foil system, and once it says platform ready, you're ready to put this down. So I'll just take this and place it with the Glimmer plate facing down like that. And you'll press this timer button, and once this stops blinking, you know you're ready to run it through your die cutting machine. All right, once that's ready, I'm going to place down the thin shim and the spacer pad and pull this right out. Then we'll bring in our Platinum 6 die cutting machine, and we're going to slowly run this right through. And the die cutting machine is going to add a little bit of pressure, which is going to press that foil down into the cardstock. All right, and then when we remove our foil, check that out. These foiled so beautifully, it pressed really nicely into my cardstock, and the foiling looks absolutely perfect. There was no skipping. It's nice, smooth cardstock, so it's going to still do a great job at foiling, and don't let them fool you. You don't need a glossy or coated surface to get the best foiling results. In fact, I found that I did a better job with the Stark White Cardstock than I did anything else, and the best part is even with all that heat, it really barely warps. I found that some of those coated cardstocks are a little bit too thin for foiling, and they'll just warp and kind of bubble. They won't give you the best results, so definitely try this if you're struggling with your hot foil. And I don't know when you would do this, but let's say you wanted to add navy to the background of this. Now you might not want to do this with sentiments, but let's say you had like an image that you had just foiled and you wanted to color it in. This is where I love having Stark White Cardstock with my foil, because now I'm able to go in and do ink blending on top of the foiling that we've already done, and the cardstock is accepting all that ink because it's not a coated cardstock. It's still going to sink in there and do all the same effects that you wanted it to. So that's why I love foiling on my regular Stark White Cardstock, because it still allows me to do all the things that I love with inks. And it makes it look like we foiled this on a piece of colored cardstocks, even though I've heard that foiling on colored cardstock isn't the greatest thing because colored cardstock can be a little bit more textured. And the foil is shiny, so it's going to resist any of that ink. So there might be some ink that just sits on top of the foil there. So you just want to wipe and kind of buff that off, and then it's nice and shiny again. And that looks really beautiful and kind of regal looking with that ink on top of it. And let me show you why I love that sentiment set so much. So the sentiments also have a coordinating die that's all on one piece. So it makes it really easy to just line up all the foiling that we've done. We can go in with a piece of mint tape to hold it down. We can quickly and easily run all of the sentiments right through, and you get them all cut out in one pass, which is what I love about having them all on one die and one foil plate. So then check this out. They cut out perfectly with a nice border around all of the sentiments, and you get 6 sentiments in this set that are ready to go for your card making needs. So you don't have to keep foiling. You could just do this a couple of times right away, and you've got lots of sentiments to work with then for your card projects. So it's by far my favorite surface for hot foiling. You get great smooth foiled results every time. And like I said, the best part is that you can ink it after the fact, which you really can't do with all of those different glossy surfaces. So this is awesome. Alright guys, that concludes today's video. I hope you really enjoyed all of the information that I shared using the Hurley Stark White Cardstock. There's lots of great techniques that work for this, and this is just the tip of the iceberg with what you can do with it. Lots of people ask me what kind of cardstock I use, so I thought I would cover it in today's video and really dive deep into all that it can do. Leave me a comment down below letting me know which card was your favorite in today's video, and also down there again is a full supplies list of everything that I used in today's video, and the new Hurley Stark White Cardstock in those different packages. So if you want the pre-cut cardstock to help your workflow go a little bit faster, I highly recommend it, and I'll have that linked down below. Thank you guys so much for watching and spending some time with me today, and I'll see you soon for another card making and crafting video.